Okay, so you want to take a deep dive into the world of environmental technicians.
Yeah.
We've got some fascinating sources here. Sounds like you really want the inside scoop. Like, what do they actually do every day? What
Mhm.
kind of impact are they having? You want it all.
Absolutely. And I think, what's really interesting here is that it's about way more than just, loving nature or like being passionate about the environment. It's
Yeah.
about scientific investigation. It's about data analysis. It's like being an environmental detective in a way.
I like that. I was looking at these career stage examples here, and it's not just about getting your bachelor's degree and then that's it, right?
Right.
There are a lot of different paths you can take, it seems like, depending on what you're interested in.
Absolutely. Yeah. You could start with a bachelor's degree, maybe assist with sample collection and basic testing.
Okay.
But with experience, think about this. You could move into designing pollution prevention plans,
Wow.
or even go on to consult with companies after getting your PhD, advising them on environmental regulations.
So you can really move up in this field.
Oh, absolutely.
And, speaking of kind of specializing your skill set,
Hmm.
I noticed that the sources mention these certifications, like Certified Environmental Scientist or
Hmm.
CES,
Right.
and then Hays-Oper.
Yeah.
Um, those seem pretty important. What are those all about?
You're right. They are really important for advancing your career. CES, that certification shows that you have a deep understanding of environmental principles and regulations. It's a big deal for anyone that wants to lead projects or maybe get into consulting.
Makes sense.
Haze-Woper, on the other hand, now that focuses on handling hazardous materials. So it's critical for technicians that are dealing with potentially dangerous substances.
Yeah, that makes sense. Something that surprised me, though, was that um, 68% of the job relies on customer service and communication.
Right.
I just assumed it would be, all science all the time.
Right.
What does that actually look like day to day for an environmental technician?
So imagine you're a technician and you have to explain to a client why their factory's emissions are exceeding permitted levels, right?
Really?
You can't just throw data at them.
Yeah.
You need to be able to communicate those complex findings really clearly, address their concerns, and then ultimately you've got to work together to find solutions. So active listening, clear communication, those are super important in this field. Yeah, it's about kind of like bridging that gap, right,
Yeah,
between the technical stuff and like, real world solutions.
totally. And speaking of using science to solve problems,
Hmm.
you mentioned earlier that this field is becoming very tech forward.
Hmm.
And one thing that really stood out to me was remote sensing.
Yeah.
So it's not just about, collecting samples out in the field anymore, is it?
No, not at all. Remote sensing has been a game changer. Like environmental technicians can use satellite imagery, aerial imagery, to collect data on vast areas. Things like deforestation patterns, water pollution levels, even like tracking wildlife populations.
Wow.
It's amazing. It's like having an eye in the sky.
That's incredible. That really shows how technology is transforming this whole field.
But, with all this really cool tech, are there still challenges involved in the day-to-day work? Like, I'm looking at this point about exposure to hazardous materials. That seems a little bit, daunting.
Yeah, it's definitely something to be aware of, but the sources really emphasized that safety is like the top priority.
Right.
So technicians, they receive a lot of training on how to handle these hazardous materials safely. They use protective equipment,
Heck.
strict safety protocols,
Huh.
all to minimize those risks.
That's reassuring to know.
Yeah.
So while there might be some inherent risks, they're meant seriously
Excellent.
with the right precautions.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes me feel a lot better. So, kind of shifting gears a bit here to the job market. The Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts 8% job growth for environmental technicians.
Which sounds pretty promising.
It's a healthy growth rate,
Yeah.
definitely. But, here's where things get interesting. It's not just about like national averages, right?
Okay.
The sources really emphasize that these opportunities can be geographically concentrated. So, a state with a big oil and gas industry is probably going to have higher demand for environmental technicians
Right.
than a state with like a primarily agricultural focus.
Great. That makes sense.
Yeah,
So someone who wants to break into this field should really do their research,
absolutely. Yeah.
see what's in demand in their region.
Yeah, and don't limit your search to just traditional environmental organizations. Like the guide mentioned that industries beyond the obvious, things like construction, manufacturing,
Okay.
They increasingly need environmental technicians too.
Oh, interesting.
They need these specialists to make sure that they're meeting environmental
Right.
regulations,
Yeah.
implementing sustainable practices.
That opens up a lot more possibilities than I initially thought.
Right.
So it's about being kind of strategic and open-minded in your job search,
Mm-hmm.
which leads me to something else the sources highlighted, the interview questions.
Ah, yes.
These can get pretty specific.
They can.
The one that really jumped out at me was, can you describe a time when you had to troubleshoot an environmental problem?
Oh, yeah.
Like, that seems designed to see how you think on your feet.
Exactly. They want to hear how you approach challenges, how you apply your knowledge, and how you find practical solutions. It's a chance for you to show off your problem-solving skills. Imagine, being asked about a time you had to deal with an unexpected spike in water pollution readings.
Okay.
Right. Instead of panicking, you could calmly explain, okay, here are the steps I took to identify the source of the pollution, and here's the solution I implemented.
Right, right. I'm starting to see the importance of that 68% customer service statistic now.
Exactly. It's all connected. And remember, a strong answer often involves not just what you did, but also the thinking behind it.
Yeah, your thought process.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you said, you're an environmental detective.
Right.
But you're not solving a crime that's already happened. You're trying to prevent one in the future.
Exactly. Exactly.
And speaking of the future, this other interview question really stood out to me. How do you stay up to date with the latest environmental research and developments?
Oh,
I mean, it is a fast-moving field, isn't it?
it absolutely is.
Yeah.
Yeah, new regulations, new technologies, discoveries are constantly emerging.
Right.
So you can't just rely on what you learned, back when you got your degree.
Yeah.
They want to see that you're actively learning and keeping up with the field.
So how do you demonstrate that in an interview? Are we talking like attending conferences, reading journals, maybe even participating in online forums with other professionals?
You got it. All of those are great ways to show, hey, I'm really committed to continuously learning.
Yeah.
Maybe you recently read this groundbreaking study on renewable energy,
Right.
or you attended a conference on the latest, environmental remediation advancements. Sharing those experiences, it shows how dedicated you are,
Right.
but it also gives you great talking points for the interview itself.
Right, right. You're kind of interviewing them back a little bit too.
Exactly.
Like, hey, this is how invested I am in, staying at the forefront of this field.
Exactly. And, while we've covered a lot about the technical aspects from data analysis to certifications, I think there's one more thing worth pondering. The source is really focused on what the job is now.
Okay.
But how might an environmental technician's role change, as things like climate change become even more pressing?
That's a big one.
Right.
It's one thing to monitor, current pollution levels,
Right.
but what about dealing with the effects we're already seeing?
Yeah, exactly. We're not just talking about today's problems anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's about anticipating tomorrow's challenges and finding innovative solutions.
Mhm.
Will environmental technicians be, the front line of climate change adaptation?
Yeah.
Will they be tasked with developing new methods for carbon capture or designing, more resilient infrastructure? It's a big question.
It really is. When you put it like that, it makes this career path seem even more important.
Oh, absolutely.
Like they're guardians of the planet in a way.
They really are. And it's not just about future challenges, though, right? It's also about future opportunities.
Right, right.
What new technologies are going to emerge? What specializations will be, really in demand? It's a really fascinating time to be entering this field, I think.
Sounds like it. Well, we covered a lot of ground today, everything from, the day-to-day realities of the job to the potential impact this career could have on the future of our planet.
It really has been a fascinating deep dive.
Yeah, it has. And for you listening, we hope this gave you a clearer picture of what it really means to be an environmental technician. It's a career that's scientifically engaging, but also deeply impactful. And no matter where you are in your own career journey, remember, resources like RoleCatcher can be super helpful as you navigate that path ahead. Until next time, keep those questions coming and never stop exploring.